Right, breaking news just coming in. Shinzo Abe's funeral has just begun. The procession has just begun. A week ago, the global great and good were gathered in London for the state funeral of Britain's Queen Elizabeth II. Now, many of them are on the other side of the world for another state funeral for Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. But the Japanese, actually, it appears, are not that thrilled about it. Not least because it's estimated to cost about $11.4 million, which is about 1.65 billion yen. And if we convert it to Indian rupees, that's over 92 crore Indian rupees. But in the last few weeks, opposition to the state funeral for Shinzo Abe has been growing. Polls actually suggest that more than half of the country's population is actually against holding this state funeral that has begun. Earlier this week, a man set himself on fire near the Prime Minister's office in Tokyo. And on Monday, around 10,000 protesters marched through the streets of the capital demanding the funeral be called off. But on the other hand, the event is drawing Japan's allies from across the globe. In attendance are US President Joe Biden, his Vice President, I beg your pardon, as Joe Biden could not make it. Singapore's Prime Minister is also there in attendance, as well as our Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Right, Maha joins us on the phone line at the moment. Maha, the procession just about to begin. The state funeral is formally beginning. What details can you share with us at the moment?
Well, this is a big event for Japan. As you well know, that in the last 50 years, they have not held a state funeral for any political leader. This is largely reserved for the imperial family, and that is why is also seeing some amount of controversy in Japan as well, because of the high cost of the state funeral, as well as breaking away from that tradition. But this is an important event for Japan for two reasons. First of all, Shinzo Abe was the longest-serving Prime Minister of Japan, and these are the arguments being given by the government. Secondly, the circumstances under which he died. This was an assassination, which clearly the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said was a political assassination because he was killed in the midst of an election process that was going on. He said this is almost like an assault on the democracy, that when he's campaigning for a candidate, this should happen to him. So for those reasons, they believe that this state funeral was...
この後、まもなく皇族各殿下がご臨席になられますので、このままお待ちください。秋篠宮皇嗣、同妃両殿下、佳子内親王殿下、寛仁親王妃信子殿下、彬子女王殿下、典仁親王妃久子殿下、承子女王殿下がご臨席になられます。上皇子、上皇后宮使がご臨席になられます。勅使、皇后宮使がご臨席になられます。
Right, Maha Siddiqui joining us live on the phone line for further updates. Maha, what does this say about Abe, that even though world leaders have gathered for his funeral, many in his own country are opposed to it?
So, Parmeshwar, the opposition to or the controversy to this state funeral is on two counts. One, people are opposed to the high cost that is being incurred at the state funeral, and secondly, that this is a breakaway from tradition, because for the last over 50 years there has been no state funeral for any political leader, and usually the state funerals are reserved for the imperial family in Japan. Hence there is an opposition. However, what we have seen is that the government's argument has been on several counts as to why this funeral should be held. First, Shinzo Abe was Japan's longest-serving prime minister. Secondly, the manner in which he was killed in an assassination which happened in the midst of an election that was going on, and the Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at that time had said that this was almost an assault on the governance, electoral system, democracy of Japan, and therefore they want to make it a point to show to their own people and the world that they will fight against any assault that is carried out on the democratic setup of Japan. Thirdly, geopolitically, Shinzo Abe was very important. He was seen as a pragmatic leader, though he showed a shift from the pacifist ideology of Japan slightly towards a more aggressive politics there by directly wanting to take on China. And that is the reason we saw him as one of the most important proponents of reviving the Quad that had been dormant for 10 years from 2007 to 2017. He was one of the persons who really pushed for it to be revived as well. And therefore, it was seen as a leader who was taking a stand against the threats of China in the Indo-Pacific. For all these reasons, the current government in Japan felt that it was necessary to honor his memory.
As Maha just mentioned, this is not a normal event. In the sense, in Japan, state funerals are reserved for members of the imperial family. Only once since World War II has a politician been given this honor, and that was all the way back in 1967. So the fact that Abe is being given a state funeral is indeed a big deal. In part, it's because of the way he died. He was gunned down at an election rally in July, and Japan mourned for him. He had never been hugely popular, though, according to opinion polls, but few would deny that he brought the country stability and security. Let's go across to Maha so that she can contextualize what Abe did for India while he was in office. Maha, he reshaped ties with India and Japan, many would say. What would you consider his most, I would say, his... Right, I'm sorry, let's listen in to the live event and we will just go across to Maha shortly.
ご着席願います。
はい、いいですか。 人々が憧れと尊敬を抱き、子どもたちの世代が自信と誇りを持てる美しい国、日本とするため、私は先頭に立って全身全霊を
That's the state funeral for Shinzo Abe. Our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, US Vice President Kamala Harris and British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly are all among the foreign dignitaries in Japan attending this funeral for the assassinated former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, despite strong public opposition to this ceremony. Let's get you a bit of a background. Public opinion was actually split when 6 days after Abe's death, the Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, said his predecessor would be afforded a state funeral. But opposition has intensified in recent weeks amid a torrent of revelations about ties between Abe's Liberal Democratic Party, now led by Kishida, and the Unification Church. The suspect in the shooting, Tetsuya Yamagami, actually told police that he had targeted Abe because he had expressed support for the church, which he blamed for bankrupting his family. Last year, Shinzo Abe had sent a congratulatory video message to a group affiliated to the church in which he praised its commitment to traditional family values. Now, as far as Abe's economic and security policies are concerned, they receive largely positive reviews abroad, but he continues to be a divisive figure at home, many would argue. Critics actually say he dragged the country to the right, treated the constitution with contempt, and presided over an administration which basically commanded cronyism. Abe was implicated in major scandals as well, but went on to become Japan's longest-serving leader shortly before he resigned, citing poor health back in 2020. Right, Maha Siddiqui joining us on the phone line at the moment. Maha, take us through some of the most significant foreign policy additions that Shinzo Abe contributed to.
So largely what he would be remembered for in the recent past, specifically in the context of the geopolitical situation in the Indo-Pacific, is the revival of the Quad, the coming together of US, Japan, India and Australia in a partnership that is largely, though they say not to counter China, but clearly with an eye on China. These four countries coming together in the Indo-Pacific was an important one that was pushed by Shinzo Abe. Shinzo Abe, in fact, many call him a leader who was pragmatic enough to understand the changing landscape and the scenario within the Indo-Pacific, and moving away from what would normally be seen as the stand of Japan, a very pacifist one. He wanted to give it a more aggressive foreign policy leaning. And that is the reason we saw him taking on this task of really pushing forward the idea of Quad, which had lied dormant since it was first floated in 2007. There was a revival of the Quad that one saw in 2017, and many believe that Abe was one of the persons who pushed for it, recognizing the threat of China in the Indo-Pacific region. So for many, and that is why we are seeing the leaders from the Indo-Pacific Quad, the Quad countries being present there, whether it's Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, Prime Minister Modi, to the Australian counterpart as well, all present there today for the state funeral of Shinzo Abe. So clearly, that is one of the big contributions, as the leaders of these countries would say, in trying to get together the forces for the Quad to be able to counter the hegemony of China.
Right. Also, he left the legacy of Abenomics, which in a sense attempted to counter like years of economic stagnation in Japan. What more can you tell us about that?
Yes, in fact, he is known for what is popularly termed now as Abenomics, because of, again, as I was pointing out, the pragmatic approach that he is believed to have taken. It refers to the kind of policies implemented by his government since, the elections way back in 2012. They are, specifically named after him because he brought in policies and goals which suited the Japanese economy at that time based on monetary easing as well as fiscal stimulus. All these were parts of a kind of reform that he brought about. So that is the reason that that economic sort of reform was also something that is attributed to him as well, and that is why it was called Abenomics. Now, during Abe's tenure, the rate of Japan's GDP growth was high. The ratio of government to government debt was relatively stabilized as well. So he brought in a lot of changes within the economic situation of Japan as well, which is one of the reasons that the present government believes that he was a statesman for the country, and therefore his memory should be honored, because he wasn't just the longest serving, but there were certain important decisions associated with his tenure, and that is why it is important to remember him. So we discussed the Quad, the geopolitical shift and change that Japan showed during his tenure, his pragmatic approach towards China, understanding that the Chinese could have ambitions in the Indo-Pacific which need to be countered, to Abenomics, or the economic situation in Japan, which he tackled, many believe, with a lot of pragmatism. All these are the reasons that the government quotes for this kind of state funeral that he's being honored with today, with leaders from various countries being present there for this big state event. Although the cost, of course, as we have discussed, is one reason why many believe that this could have been done away with, not had. Also the break from tradition, because largely state funerals are reserved in Japan for the imperial family, barring an exception that was seen many years ago, 50 years ago.
Right. As always, Maha, thank you so much for joining us with the latest and for actually breaking down the details for us, for contextualizing Abe's legacy. As Maha mentioned, in Japan, state funerals are reserved for members of the imperial family. Only once since World War II has a politician been given this honor, and that was all the way back in 1967. So the fact that Abe is being given a state funeral is indeed a big deal. In part, it's also because of the way he died. He was gunned down, remember, at an election rally back in July, and Japan mourned for him. He had never been hugely popular, according to opinion polls, but few would deny that he brought the country stability and security. With that, we're stepping into a very short break. We get you the latest updates on the other side of this break.